Okay, students, going to be lecturing over the Louisiana Purchase and the doubling of the national domain. So I'm going to sum things up here initially and go into kind of some background on the Louisiana Territory and then get into the purchase. So on July 4th, 1803, the session of the Louisiana Territory, the news of the session of the Louisiana Territory arrived in Washington the night before, and it was announced on July 4th. So in 1803, Jefferson, he bought Louisiana. It's this vast territory between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. He buys it from France for $15 million, nearly twice the sum of the budget of the federal government, or the expenses of the federal government. Through Congress, they did not authorize this amount. Okay, so his enemies are going to accuse him of abusing his constitutional powers. Jefferson agreed to pay though. He exerts an extreme amount of authority in doing this, and he doubles the size of the country with the stroke of a single pen, right? So he removed Britain, France, Russia, and Spain from serious contention on the American continent in doing this, and continues westward expansion for the United States. So in 1682, French explorer Le Sieur de La Salle had claimed this territory for France, and he had named it for King Louis XIV, the most powerful French king, the Sun King. And for nearly 100 years, it remained this uncharted, vast wilderness populated by Native Americans, small number of French outposts and settlements. Now, something that happened. The bursting of the Mississippi bubble. This happened during the reign of Louis XIV, but between 1718 and 1720. Let's go into this a little bit. This occurred when French-based Mississippi Company, pioneered by Scottish financier John Law, created some real estate speculation trying to colonize Louisiana. Now, this is going to be like starting at New Orleans, but moving north, and would include places like Arkansas, right? So he bills Louisiana Territory not as a savage and untamed wilderness, but as a paradise, a utopia, a Garden of Eden. And once people arrived, they realized that they had been lied to, and the bursting of the Mississippi bubble causes a lot of economic problems for French colonization, okay? Now, after the French and Indian War, France gifted Louisiana Territory to Spain. New French king, Louis XV, he saw Louisiana as a swampy land filled with savages, which had no commercial benefits. The main importance of the area was the economic benefits of the Mississippi River, however. Okay, so let's get into the Treaty of San Ildefonso in 1800, okay, starting in 1800. Napoleon Bonaparte, he had hopes of regaining a French imperial presence in the New World. Okay, so if you remember in the Treaty of Paris, 1763, France loses all of its colonial possessions in North America and India. Now, Napoleon wants to regain lands west of the Mississippi River, as the United States has settled most lands to the east of the river by this time that Napoleon is in power. So this Treaty of San Ildefonso is a secret treaty between Spain and France in which France regains Louisiana Territory back from Spain. This, again, is the vast territory between the Mississippi and the Rocky Mountains. And this would be the whole Mississippi Valley to the west of the river, plus New Orleans. Now, Napoleon hoped this would become the heart of a great French empire in North America. So what this also means is that foreign powers are vying for control of North America. The country had a population of around 5.5 million peoples at this time, and 17 states and additional Western territories by the time that Jefferson is during his first term in office. Now let's talk about the French Empire in the New World under Napoleon, okay? So he has these ambitions. Now Napoleon had, they held sugar-rich West Indian islands, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Santo Domingo. Okay? He, however, experienced a slave rebellion amongst Caribbean slaves who were in a state of unrest and posed a threat to his hopes for the islands. Now, Africans in Santo Domingo who had been inspired by the French Revolution revolted, established their own republic under the leadership of Toussaint Louverture. I believe is how you pronounce that. Napoleon sent an army to the West Indies and temporarily crushed the rebellion and restored French control. But this was an early sign of things that were to come. The British and the Adams administration supported the rebel regime of Toussaint Louverture. In contrast, Jefferson assured the French minister in Washington that American people, especially slaveholders, did approve of the Black Revolutionary and did not approve of the Black Revolutionary and did not like the example that it set for their own slaves. Okay, so you get these slaveholders in the South, and Jefferson, being from Virginia and owning over 100 slaves himself, makes these comments. Jefferson even made some implications that the United States may help Napoleon put down the insurrection. So that's contrasting the Adams administration, who's siding with Britain, saying, "Hey, we support the overthrow of the French in the islands here," whereas Jefferson is saying the contrast. This is kind of North-South sectionalism sort of dichotomy here going on. Now, the United States desperately wants New Orleans by Jefferson's first term in office. Jefferson reverses his sympathies towards France when he heard rumors of the secret treaty and transfer of Louisiana from Spain back to France via the Treaty of San Ildefonso. Now, New Orleans was located in a strategic spot right on the Mississippi River, and the United States wanted the right of deposit in New Orleans. Pinckney's Treaty of 1795 with Spain had ensured Americans the right to deposit in New Orleans, but in 1802, the Spanish intendant at New Orleans, who governed the city, as the French had not taken possession, closed the port of New Orleans to the United States for their right of deposit. It is the American pro-French diplomat Robert Livingston who suggests that the United States should buy the vast western lands that are part of Louisiana from France to help mitigate this issue. Jefferson persuades Congress to appropriate funds for an expansion of the army and the construction of a river fleet in the meantime, preparing for possible issues. And if you also recall, the First Barbary War is going on during this same time, and Jefferson is having to he had previously downsized the Navy, and he's having to recommission and expand the Navy to deal with these issues. So Napoleon decides to accept Livingston's proposal, and he offers the United States the entire Louisiana territory, not just New Orleans. Now, a yellow fever epidemic had wiped out much of the French army in the New World, and Napoleon's expeditionary force he had sent to take over possession of Louisiana had been frozen in the Dutch harbor throughout the winter of 1802 and 1803. So getting into the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. So Robert Livingston and James Monroe are sent to Paris to negotiate by Jefferson. Livingston was the American minister to Paris. They are tasked with, again, buying New Orleans. Now, Albert Galentine, Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury, has approved the purchase of New Orleans for $10 million. Monroe was told he could not buy New Orleans, but must purchase the entire Louisiana territory, and Napoleon offers to sell the entire territory to the United States for $15 million or 80 million francs. This was an area that totaled around 828,000 square miles. And this is around 4 cents per acre, and is the greatest real estate deal in history. Now, as I mentioned earlier, $15 million, nearly twice the size of the federal budget, and Congress did not authorize that amount. So Jefferson, if you remember, he is a strict construction when it comes. He is strict construction when it comes to interpretation of the Constitution. And this is something that people are going to be very critical of him making this purchase, right? And not only that, not only him doing it, because it doesn't really say anything about buying land in the Constitution, but him doing it for more than the amount, right? So Monroe makes the purchase without talking with Jefferson first. The United States then grants exclusive commercial privileges to France in the port of New Orleans, and agreed to incorporate the residents of Louisiana into the Union with the same rights and privileges of other citizens of the United States. Now, the boundaries of the purchase were not super clearly defined. France was during a period of economic downturn, again, for a variety of reasons. Let's review those: the bursting of the Mississippi bubble and the wars of King Louis XIV, the French and Indian War, and the economic issues and debt that ensued from that, and then the wars of the French Revolution, and then the Napoleonic Wars. So Napoleon needs money to fund his wars against the British and European coalitions that formed to check his rise to power and expansion. On April 30th, 1803, America suddenly doubles in size almost overnight. Louisiana Territory would become 6 new states and furnish land for portions of 9 additional states. So was the Louisiana Purchase constitutional? I've mentioned and hinted at this a couple of times. Jefferson was happy about the purchase, but he was unsure about whether or not the United States had the authority to accept it, as there was nothing about acquisition of new territory in the Constitution. Jefferson, strict constructionist, and it doesn't say anything about the purchasing land for the United States in the Constitution, so that's an issue. Jefferson and his supporters said it was constitutional. He said his power to make treaties allowed him to make the purchase. Here's a quote from Jefferson: "That the good sense of our country will correct the evil of loose construction when it shall produce ill effects." End quote. So this is a switch, according to some, when Jefferson does this, from strict interpretation to loose interpretation of the Constitution. The Federalists were against this purchase and feared the Louisiana Territory would be populated with Democratic Republican yeoman farmers, which would help push the Jeffersonian agenda. Jefferson ultimately, again, removed threats from other foreign nations through the purchase, though. So there's some upsides from Britain, France, Russia, and Spain. There's no more real serious contention on the continent, okay? Now, there will be future issues with Spain, and we'll get into those later on in the course. Now, let's talk about Lewis and Clark and their exploration of the West with the cores of discovery, okay? So Jefferson, his private secretary from Virginia, and his neighbor from Virginia, Meriwether Lewis, and a famous explorer and brother of a Revolutionary War hero, and also William Clark, lead an expedition called the Cores of Discovery. The 33-year-old Lewis was skilled in fighting Native Americans and the ways of the wilderness. And the 29-year-old Clark was also a skilled frontiersman and Indian fighter. Now, Jefferson had planned for the expedition to cross the continent to the Pacific Ocean, gather geographic facts, and investigate prospects of trade with Native Americans that inhabited the territory. Lewis and Clark set out on their expedition in the spring of 1804 with 4 men, starting up the Missouri from St. Louis with the Shoshone woman Sacagawea as their guide. Lewis and Clark eventually cross the Rocky Mountains and descend the Snake and Columbia rivers. And in the late autumn of 1805, they camp on the Pacific coast. By September of 1806, they're back in St. Louis with elaborate recordings of their findings, the geography, native civilizations, and a lengthy account in their diaries of their experiences. They sent Jefferson boxes full of their discoveries: animal skeletons, buffalo robes, maps, mineral samples, animal antlers, Native American corn from the Great Plains. Jefferson planted this corn at Monticello and displayed the elk antlers there as well. Now, in reference to Native Americans, as president, Jefferson encouraged the removal of Eastern tribes from their ancestral homelands to the West. Okay, now we'll talk more about Indian removal when we get to Andrew Jackson. So Zebulon Pike, Jefferson also dispatched Lieutenant Zebulon Montgomery Pike, then 26 years old, to lead an expedition in the fall of 1805 from St. Louis into the upper Mississippi Valley. In summer of 1806, he set out again up the valley of the Arkansas River and into what later became Colorado. Pike's accounts of the region gave the inaccurate impression to many Americans in the East that the land between the Missouri River and Rockies was completely an uninhabitable and uncultivatable desert. Okay, a few comments on something else going on at the time, and this will be something I follow up on in later lectures. And this is the Burr Conspiracy, okay, and Essex Junto. So Essex Junto is a reference to some New England Federalists who wanted to secede from the United States. This is after the Louisiana Purchase and Jefferson's re-election in 1804. New England Federalists very upset. They're paranoid about the expansion of Democratic Republican ideas to Western territories. And Essex Junto is a group of the most extreme Federalists who favor this secession from the Union. Guess who the leading Federalist in New York is? Alexander Hamilton. And he actually refuses to support any ideas of New England secession. Federalists in New York turned to Hamilton's greatest rival, Aaron Burr, Jefferson's former VP. Hamilton accuses Burr of plotting treason and made numerous private remarks which circulated in the press about Burr's character and integrity. And Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel, killing him in the duel because Hamilton helped keep Burr from becoming governor of New York. They had had this dispute. So Hamilton was upset with Burr for his approach to politics. Burr blamed Hamilton for his defeat in the election of 1800. They dueled in New Jersey. Hamilton was shot and died the next day. Burr's political career over. He fled to South Carolina, stayed with some family before returning to D.C. in 1805. Burr then travels to the southwestern portion of the United States with different schemes to take land from the Spanish. Burr wanted to capture Mexico from the Spanish and separate the Southwest from the United States and create an empire where he would be the governor, ruler, president type figure, emperor, whatever you want to call it. Which when we start talking about Texas and the lands of the Southwest and war with the Spanish and between the Spanish and the United States and Mexican-American War, you'll see that Burr's goals and ideas are not too far flung. So that's it for today with this lecture over the Louisiana Purchase and the doubling of the national domain. I'll be back next time with a lecture over Jefferson's second term in office. All right. Thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you soon.